A high productivity economy is one where competition thrives and investment is rewarded. We need to revitalise competition policy in this country. It's been nearly 30 years since the landmark national competition policy reforms of the 1990s, which turbocharged productivity by opening up closed shops and monopolies. The modern Labor Party would run a mile from the approach taken by their predecessors, who understood that the principles of competition policy link directly with improved living standards for all Australians. It's time to take a fresh look across our economy. From energy to banking to transport, we must ensure our markets are truly competitive and consumers have choice.
Well, thank you everyone for coming into the Centre for Independent Studies to hear from the Leader of the Opposition, the Honourable Sussan Ley. Now, CIS, of course, is non-partisan. Our independence is central to our effectiveness in shaping the policy debate. In the past month or so, we've hosted the New South Wales Premier, and in a couple of weeks, we will host the Federal Education Minister. But since taking up this job, I've been struck by people telling me about the importance of a classical liberal think tank to Australia, the Centre for Independent Studies. And certainly it is very much in the national interest to have a strong opposition to hold the government of the day to account to test alternative policy platforms. CIS is about to head into our 50th year. And I believe that as in the 1970s when we were launched, Australia needs a much sharper policy response to the economic issues of the day. Declining real household incomes, productivity stuck at 2016 levels, and a decade of deficits and bracket creep income tax increases out into the future. We're delighted to host Sussan here today with her real-world experience as a politician, commercial pilot, a farmer, and even a tax officer. Sussan, of course, was elected Liberal leader after the May election, which was the Liberals' worst ever election defeat. It hasn't got any easier. There was that split with the Nationals, but then united again. Jacinta Naminginta Price and now Andrew Hastie have gone to the backbench, and in the past few days, Barnaby Joyce has hit the fan. Amid all this, Sussan is pressing on with the policy debates that the opposition and Australia need to have. So can you please join me in welcoming to the stage Sussan Ley.
Well, thank you. Thank you, Stutch, and thank you to all of you, including, of course, the CIS, for the opportunity to be with you today. I want to acknowledge Michael Stutchbury and the team here at the Centre for Independent Studies, because you do incredibly important work steering our national conversation. To my colleagues from both the federal and state parliaments, thank you for being here today. Our nation stands at a turning point. For the first time in living memory, productivity and living standards are sliding backwards. Over the past decade, productivity growth has fallen to its weakest rate in 60 years. Now, productivity is not about working longer hours or pushing harder on the tools. Australians already do that. I know this from my own life, working a second and sometimes a third job to improve my flying qualifications, picking up 800 fleeces a day in the shearing sheds of Western Queensland, and raising my 3 children during recession and drought in the 1990s. Productivity is about making every effort count, about getting the most from every personal endeavour. When productivity grows, wages lift, the cost of living eases, and governments can fund the services that Australians rely on without higher taxes. But when productivity stalls or falls, the opposite takes hold. Families keep working as hard as ever, yet their pay just doesn't go as far. Today, real household disposable income per capita is 6% lower than when Labor came to government in 2022. OECD data shows that Australia has had the biggest fall in living standards in the developed world. It feels like Australians are running faster just to stand still. That's the reality people face, and it is not acceptable. And it wasn't supposed to be this way. The Coalition left office with unemployment at 3.9%, the lowest in almost 50 years, and record revenues flowing into the Treasury thanks to a rebounding economy and strong commodity prices. But that opportunity has been squandered by Labor. Pandemic-level spending was treated as the new normal, with no serious effort to rein it in. And the result? Inflation that stayed higher for longer, leaving mortgage holders paying around $1,800 more every month. As former Reserve Bank Governor Philip Lowe observed, after COVID, we haven't really got back to a clearly articulated framework for decision-making with fiscal policy. It seems to be, where there is a need, we'll spend, end quote. A short-lived revenue surge delivered rare surpluses in 22-23 and 23-24, but now deficits as far as the eye can see. At the same time, Labor has piled on new regulatory burdens at the worst possible moment. According to the Housing Industry Association, just getting environmental approval for a new housing project can take 4 years. Businesses, especially small and family enterprises, are drowning in red tape. Tens of thousands of businesses have gone bust since Anthony Albanese was elected in 2022. And just starting a typical small business like a cafe can involve up to 30 separate regulatory steps. Instead of stopping this madness, Labor is making things worse. Their workplace relations changes reward unions with restrictive laws and industry-wide pay settings that wind the clock back to the 1970s. The Business Council warns these changes drive down productivity and threaten investment and innovation. Yet the government presses ahead with even more industrial regulation, making it harder and harder for businesses to expand, which makes it harder and harder for them to hire new workers. Anthony Albanese doesn't understand that a healthy economy must have private sector businesses driving growth and job creation. How could he possibly understand this when under Labor, 8 out of every 10 new jobs have been created by government, not business? You only need to listen to our top economic authorities to understand the scale of the challenge. In 2023, the Productivity Commission's landmark 5-year inquiry warned that Australia's productivity growth had flatlined and that without action, the consequences would be severe. It cautioned that, in the absence of productivity growth, the cost disease will worsen and spread, and noted with government services consuming an ever larger share of the economy and requiring ever faster productivity growth elsewhere to fund it. The message from the Productivity Commission was clear. Our economy isn't working for Australians like it used to, and unless we change course, future generations will pay the price. Those warnings have now come true. Labor's poor policy choices and lack of reform appetite have left Australia exactly where the PC feared: slower growth, rising costs, and a shrinking capacity to fund the services that Australians rely on. And business leaders share the same concern. In their 2025 joint submission, 27 major business groups warned that productivity growth over the past decade was the weakest in 6 decades, and that if we do not fix it, the next generation will miss out on the quality of life we enjoy today. These are not academic figures. These are employers and investors watching costs spiral, the investment pipeline dry up, and risk, which is the price of progress, in retreat. With the dynamism of our economy is virtually slipping away. With zero productivity growth virtually so far this decade, we are already well behind the pace needed to meet the Intergenerational Report's long-term assumption of 1.2% a year. To course correct, we would now need more than 2% a year for the rest of the decade, something not achieved in generations. Even the Reserve Bank has cut its medium-term assumption for productivity growth to just 0.7%, barely half of Treasury's forecast. That means slower improvements in living standards than Australians have historically enjoyed. The intergenerational report also highlights rising fiscal pressures from an ageing population, higher health and care costs, and interest payments on debt. Why does all this matter? Because without a productivity boost, Australians will be consigned to a future of lower incomes, higher taxes, and harder choices. That is the very definition of intergenerational unfairness. The evidence from every quarter reaches the same conclusion. Labor isn't working, and because of them, neither are a staggering number of Australians, 130,000, who have entered unemployment since Anthony Albanese was elected. Australia must act decisively to lift productivity. Under my leadership, the Liberal and National parties will be guided by enduring principles that have always defined us. These principles reflect our belief in freedom, choice, aspiration, and enterprise, anchored by reward for effort. Government must enable Australians to thrive, not stand in their way. First, as I outlined in my speech to the Committee for Economic Development of Australia in Melbourne last month, we will restore fiscal discipline. Every dollar wasted is borrowed against our children's future. Government must live within its means, just as families and businesses do. That means responsible spending, a sustainable safety net for those who truly need it, and keeping taxes lower so the economy can grow. Second, we will reward effort and encourage enterprise. Australia must always be a place where hard work and risk-taking are rewarded, not punished. That belief is not abstract for me. It comes from the values instilled in me by the sacrifices of my parents who migrated to Australia for a new and unknown life. It comes from my own journey, where I took risks to build a future in the country I came to love. Changing jobs when I had to or when the money ran out, from air traffic controller to pilot to shearer's cook. Living in a caravan and saving every dollar for a start on the family farm. Embarking on university study with young children, a mountain of debt, and all of the challenges that come with life on the land. Those experiences taught me the dignity of work, the meaning of aspiration, and the conviction that government must reward effort, not punish it. Get out of the way, not stand in the way. That is why I have always believed that if you work hard and play by the rules, you should be able to keep more of what you earn. Yet today, Australians are working harder than ever, while tax receipts have climbed to a 19-year high as a share of the economy. Last year alone, the Albanese government collected more than $650 billion in taxes. That's almost $2 billion every single day, drawn from the hard work and enterprise of Australian workers and businesses. And instead of paying down debt, Labor piles on more taxes, more spending, and more waste. Today, I announce that at the next election, the Coalition will take to the people a plan for personal income tax cuts. We'll start where the pressure is greatest. Low and middle income earners who are feeling the squeeze from higher prices and rising living costs. Now, this is not a passing policy preference. It's more than just a commitment to lower taxes. I have never been more convinced, more determined, and more passionate about anything I have ever done in public life than I am today about making this pledge to the Australian people. Every instinct in my being tells me that Australians should keep more of what they earn. It is a principle I carry from my life as a farmer, a mother, a tax officer, and now Leader of the Opposition. That is why the work of the Shadow Ministry will be anchored in two primary goals: lower personal income taxes and budget repair. Every time we say no to Labor's waste, we will look first to return those savings to taxpayers or to strengthen the nation's finances. Because every dollar Labor spends is a dollar you have to pay. And so every dollar we save is one we will try to put back in your pocket. Whilst early work on our tax cuts plan has already begun, we will determine the scale and scope of our eventual package as the final budget position becomes clearer over the next 2.5 years. But during this term, when Labor wastes a dollar, and people hear me and my team say we oppose that spending, I want Australians to have this pledge front of mind. Australia cannot afford to keep drifting away from rewarding effort towards punishing it. When our greatest Prime Minister, John Howard, left office, the average worker paid 22.3% of their income in tax. Today, it is 24.3%. And the Parliamentary Budget Office projects it will climb to 27.7% by 2035-36. That means families working longer hours will see less in their pay packets. Small business owners will be pushed into higher brackets sooner, and ambition itself will be taxed away. We cannot build prosperity, whether it be economic, social, institutional, or personal, by taxing the very foundations of its existence. The answer is living within our means and recognising and rewarding the effort made by hardworking Australians by enabling them to keep more of what they earn. Tax relief doesn't just help everyday Australians struggling with rising living costs. It's good for our economy and it's the right thing to do. It means that when Australians work hard to get ahead, they're incentivised rather than penalised. It means if you work extra hours, take an extra shift, earn a promotion or get a second job, you get to keep more of what you've earned. Because the money you earn is your money, not the government's, and you should decide how it's spent. Whether that's getting ahead on your mortgage, spending money on children's sport, saving for a holiday, setting up a home business on the side, or just paying the bills. Tax relief is also about backing small businesses because when there is more money in people's pockets, we know it gets spent in our local businesses. Third, we will keep government focused and targeted. The Commonwealth should do fewer things and do them better. People want a parliament that understands what their life is like and a government that gets out of their way. Canberra should never try to be all things to all people. It must direct help to where it is most needed, instead of wasting money where it's not. Programs like Labor's electric vehicle tax break are not about fairness. Every dollar wasted convincing someone who can already afford to buy a car to buy a specific type of car is a dollar denied to someone who truly needs our help. Governments need to ditch the gimmicks and offer practical support for Australians who are doing it tough. Fourth, we will act to deliver intergenerational fairness. Millennials and Gen Z are Australia's new forgotten generation. Our duty is to safeguard their opportunities, not saddle them with debt. At the moment, Australians are paying $50,000 in interest every single minute. That's money that could have been invested in schools, hospitals, roads, or perhaps most crucially of all for Australia's new forgotten generation, initiatives to restore the home ownership dream in this country. We will make decisions with the future in mind so our next generation inherit opportunity, not a ballooning debt burden. I don't want my 6 grandchildren, all 6 or under, facing a future of working harder and longer, all to pay for a mountain of debt they had no role in accruing. But that's what they face, because Labor can't get their spending under control today. Finally, we back a smaller, enabling government. Government's job is to focus on the essentials: secure borders, safe communities, a fair safety net, and a pro-market environment that supports business and jobs. That means clearing away unnecessary regulation, backing hard work and good ideas, and allowing them the freedom to grow. Above all, relieving Australians from bureaucracy and trusting them to get on with their lives. These are not slogans. They are the moral compass that will guide our economic reform agenda. Because a strong economy is the foundation of a fair society, cannot have one without the other. Now, having outlined the principles, let me sketch the initial suite of policy directions the Coalition will pursue to kickstart Australia's productivity revival. This is not an exhaustive list or a full election platform. It's a set of priority areas where we see both urgent need and realistic opportunity for reform. Each of these aligns not only with our values, but with what independent experts and business people are telling us needs to be done. One of the fastest ways to boost investment and productivity is to clear the clogged arteries of regulation that are strangling projects and entrepreneurship. Whether it's building critical infrastructure, opening a mine, or starting a new business venture, no project that meets environmental and safety standards should be stuck in limbo for years on end, waiting for bureaucratic sign-offs. Overlapping federal and state assessments must be streamlined. Regulators must make decisions within a reasonable, clear timeframe, bringing Australia into line with best practice overseas. Our goal is simple: bring down the absurd delays and give investors and communities the certainty they need, crave and deserve. A broad coalition of industries has identified faster planning and project approvals as one of the top reform priorities for lifting productivity. As Environment Minister, I was on track to secure the support of state and territory leaders, both Liberal and Labor, from around the country. But Anthony Albanese blocked it at every turn. He never understood the win-win, that you can have projects that build jobs and communities and also protect the environment. Under a government I lead, decisions would be delivered with certainty and speed. Because time is money, and we will save both for the Australian economy by getting things built without unnecessary bureaucratic hold-ups. But under Labor, the story has been the opposite, with regulation piled on at record pace. Since Labor came to office, they've introduced more than 5,000 new regulations and 400 new laws, adding at least $4.4 billion in extra compliance costs. To put that in perspective, Australia now has more than 1,200 Acts of Parliament in force. New Zealand gets by with just over 1,000 and Canada with fewer than 900. Canada has 14 million more people living in their country, yet we have a third more laws. That tells you everything about the regulatory culture we're dealing with. And when Labor claims to be reducing red tape, the results are almost comical. Their flagship regulatory reform omnibus bill promised common sense relief. Yet when you drill into it, the type of burden being lifted was allowing marriage celebrants to use a digital identity to verify paperwork instead of citing a physical copy. A small win for 10,000 celebrants, but cold comfort for hundreds of thousands of small businesses drowning in forms, fees and approvals. That's why we need a different approach, one that actually clears the clutter instead of adding to it. To do this, we will be taking a close look at duplicative and excessive regulations that serve no purpose except to cost jobs, innovation and time. We need to look at federal regulations to identify outdated or overlapping rules, especially where states also regulate. Every new regulation should be subject to a strict cost-benefit test focused on growth and competitiveness. Labor should be introducing sunset clauses and automatic reviews so that regulations expire after a set period unless they're expressly renewed. But in this Parliament alone, they have introduced 51 bills and only 7 have contained an impact assessment. That means 6 out of every 7 bills are tabled with no serious regard for what they mean for Australians and Australian businesses. We need an approach that stops new rules from becoming permanent barnacles on the economy. And we are backed by the Productivity Commission, which, in its draft recommendations on creating a dynamic and resilient economy, urged government to adopt new principles that support dynamism and hold regulators accountable for delivering growth and innovation. Further, we'll make sure that regulators tasked with safeguarding the public interest, from ASIC to the ACCC to the public service departments, actually have a mandate to facilitate business activity. Regulation should be smart, lean, and routinely pruned. But right now, it resembles a dense jungle that Labor just keeps adding to. A productive economy in the 2020s and beyond needs modern, flexible workplace arrangements that allow employers and employees to adapt, innovate, and find win-win gains in productivity. Unfortunately, the current government's approach has been to double down on a 20th century centralised industrial relations mindset, dictated to by a few unaccountable union leaders. Labor's restrictive industrial relations changes are acting as a handbrake on productivity. Multi-employer bargaining laws are threatening small businesses with conditions they cannot afford. Labor's push to legislate a one-size-fits-all approach across whole sectors ignores the needs of many employers and workers. We will chart a different course. We believe in enterprise-level bargaining, where businesses and their staff can strike agreements that reward higher performance and suit their circumstances, rather than industry-wide decrees. We believe in options like flexible hours, remote work arrangements, and modern award structures that reflect today's digital economy. Let me be very clear. We support work from home. That is something that we got wrong in the lead up to the 2025 election, and we have listened. We know employers and employees will take a common sense approach. Different arrangements suit different industries, sectors, businesses, and workers. I want to give Australian workers this assurance. Flexibility does not mean stripping away worker protections. It means giving workers more choice in how they balance work and life, and giving businesses the ability to test new ideas, attract talent, and reward merit. As the Productivity Commission highlighted, a thriving, adaptable workforce is key to innovation and higher wages. A fair and balanced industrial relations system would create more jobs and more productivity gains. These gains, shared between workers and businesses, provide the foundations for higher living standards and economic growth. Human capital, the skills and ingenuity of our people, is the most important resource for productivity. To build a more skilled and adaptable workforce, we need to revisit Australia's approach to tertiary education and training. This means working closely with industry to ensure vocational training and higher education are more closely aligned and actually equip people with the skills and knowledge for the modern economy, whether in advanced manufacturing, IT, healthcare, or the trades. It also means incentivising upskilling so that workers can adapt as technology evolves, particularly with the rise of AI, which presents so much opportunity. We will look at reforms recommended by experts in the field. For instance, implementing a skills passport, making it easier for Australians to access short courses to acquire new skills quickly, and better integrating our university and vocational systems with employers' needs. Just as business shouldn't wait for lengthy environmental and regulatory approvals, tertiary providers shouldn't be waiting months or years for approvals, especially for new scope or new courses to meet changing workforce needs. We must also dramatically improve our performance in foundational areas like STEM education, which underpins so many high productivity industries. At the same time, Australia needs to become a leader in harnessing the data and digital economy for growth. We will support measures that encourage businesses of all sizes to adopt new technologies, from AI to cloud computing, by removing barriers and providing targeted incentives for digital innovation. The Productivity Commission's inquiry into Australia's data and digital future spoke of capturing the digital dividend of new ideas, and we intend to capture it. Because a smarter skills agenda is not just social policy, it's core economic policy. Finally, a high productivity economy is one where competition thrives and investment is rewarded. We need to revitalise competition policy in this country. It's been nearly 30 years since the landmark national competition policy reforms of the 1990s, which turbocharged productivity by opening up closed shops and monopolies. The modern Labor Party would run a mile from the approach taken by their predecessors, who understood that the principles of competition policy link directly with improved living standards for all Australians. It's time to take a fresh look across our economy. From energy to banking to transport, we must ensure our markets are truly competitive and consumers have choice. For example, opening retail electricity and gas markets to competition allowed households and small businesses in most states to shop around for the best deal, putting downward pressure on prices and improving service. The Coalition will task the Productivity Commission and the ACCC with identifying areas where competition is insufficient and recommending changes to unleash competitive forces. Whether that's cracking down on anti-competitive conduct, removing barriers to entry for new players, or reforming oligopolistic market structures. These are just initial steps in our policy development. We will continue to develop policies throughout the term as we consult with experts and the community. We intend to go to the next election with a comprehensive, costed plan to get Australia out of this productivity rut and into a new era of shared prosperity. What I've outlined today are the priorities, especially in taxation, deregulation, and unleashing the forces of enterprise, which will guide our first actions. They are priorities backed by credible analysis from the Productivity Commission's findings to the business community's recommendations, and importantly, they are politically realistic. These are ideas that a reform-oriented government can implement now without needing decades of debate. They don't pit Australians against each other. Rather, they offer win-win outcomes. A stronger economy that works better for businesses and workers, especially for Australia's new forgotten generation. As I conclude, let me speak directly to the urgency of this mission. Every delay in reform means lost opportunities, foregone jobs and wages, and a heavier debt burden for our children. The government talks about productivity, but fails to act. I refuse to accept that Australia's best days are behind us. Australia is the best country in the world, but we can never take that for granted. At the next election, Australians will face a choice: a weaker nation under Labor or a stronger future built on hard work, fairness, and lower taxes under the Coalition. Our vision is of a confident, competitive Australia where productivity growth delivers rising incomes, families can afford homes, and future generations inherit opportunity, not debt. With the right leadership, we can write a new rulebook that advances prosperity for all. Productivity reform is not abstract. It is about building a stronger, more prosperous nation and creating a better life for every Australian, for all of us. The task is clear and the time is now. Thank you.
Along with productivity, red tape, deregulation, a bit of IR, the headline out of your speech is that the Coalition will take a plan for personal income tax cuts to the next election. And it follows Coalition went to the May election under Peter Dutton with a platform of higher taxes than Labor. So clearly the Liberals need to regain your low tax credentials, and CIS in general would support that sort of thing. But the exact words are no doubt important, and you nominated two primary goals: lower personal income tax and budget repair, so rewarding effort and getting the books in order. But they can be at odds, obviously. Which one comes first?
Well, Stutch, those two objectives will frame, I think it's clear they frame our thinking and they will frame our approach. So every time you hear Labor talking about a program that you instinctively think, why would we spend public money on that? You can know that me and my team will be saying, all right, that needs to go to either personal income tax reduction, tax relief for individuals, or budget repair. And we can't ignore one and not the other, if you know what I mean, because they are vital. They speak to our liberal values, and with this country's debt escalating to $1.2 trillion, clearly we cannot ignore the state of the books. But, Michael, individuals, people deserve, as I've said many times, to keep more of what they earn and to know that they've got a political party, the Liberals and Nationals, that are backing that in every single day.
So to press the tax cut point and your point about people retaining more of what they earn, so as well as perhaps a one-off personal income tax cut package to the election, would you consider promising to, and it came up a little bit in the campaign, promising to index the personal income tax scales to stop this inflation tax by inflationary stealth?
I hear the frustration of people who are creeping into the next tax brackets, and I understand that well. We're going to start with addressing personal income tax cuts. That's where we can give the most relief now to low and middle income earners who are really doing it tough. I'm conscious, Michael, that there are a lot of Australians who are battling right now, and that tax relief for low and middle income earners as a priority is important. Now, budgets, as you know, are about setting priorities, so that will be our priority.
Australia's 30% company tax rate now is high by international standards, as the international tax rates have fallen and acting as a penalty on foreign capital being invested here. Does the Coalition intend to do anything about this if it returned to office?
We always want lower, simpler, fairer taxes, and you've heard that many times and you'll continue to hear it. But again, with the priorities that we are faced with, the personal income tax that I have outlined today is our first priority.
We've seen government spending ratchet up by about 3 to 4% of GDP since before the pandemic, mostly through low productivity care economy spending. Will you aim to reverse this blowout in the size of government?
We have to, as your Robert Carling has identified very eloquently, Stutch. More than 50% of voters get most of their money from government welfare, government salaries or subsidies, and that ballooning of government spending is coming at the cost of the private sector. I think Robert's also identified that public demand is ratcheting up at 56%, private demand at 16%. What that tells us is that all of this borrowed money being put on the nation's credit card is crowding out private sector investment and crippling the opportunities that really are the engine room of growth for the future, the private sector.
You've raised Robert Carling's point about the majority of voters now relying on government for more than 50% of their income as part of this culture of dependency, and that line really strikes home in a environment where much of the population seems quite content to have government spend more on middle-class welfare. They seem to be quite happy about this and thinking the bill's going to be paid by someone else. Now, you've pushed back on what you called universal free everything. Will the Coalition stand against any further expansion of universal entitlements, such as the Prime Minister's plan to take so-called universal childcare to the next election?
We will stand against it in principle because what it demonstrates is a clear difference between Labor Party values and Liberal Party values. And I always say with Labor, it's tax, spend, interfere, but it's also one size fits all. We believe in freedom and choice and aspiration and enterprise. And as a previous childcare minister, I value the long day care model in Australia. It's important, but it's also important that we respect that if someone can afford to pay for something, then the government shouldn't be subsidising them to the same degree that they are to someone who can't afford to pay for that something. And that is a critical point that I made in my CEDA speech. And sure, there are tough questions, but these are tough issues that the government seems unable to confront. And their electric vehicle FBT tax break is a perfect example. Why should somebody receive that tax break, which is paid for by a person who can never afford it or wouldn't make those choices? So we do have to address this culture of dependency.
Now, talking about tough decisions like this, I think the Coalition has also foreshadowed increasing defence spending from the low 2s to 3% of GDP as Anthony Albanese lands in Washington to go into the Oval Office to meet with Donald Trump. but increasing defence spending, which no doubt is sort of called for in the geopolitical strategic environment we're in, might cost $15 to $20 billion a year of extra spending before you do anything else. So, and even in the Abbott hockey first budget, taxes actually increased to tax the budget deficit. Remember that high income deficit levy. Are you in danger with pushing on the tax cuts, which is all things being equal is a very good thing, but are you in danger of not being upfront enough with the Australian people about the scale of the spending cuts needed to get the budget back to
Well, I was there
balance?
for the 2013 election and the 2014 budget, and I remember it all well. And I'm ready for another campaign of fear and cuts. I can see the Treasurer dusting it off now. And I know we'll be asked over and over again, what will you cut? But I will just always remind people at that point of three things. The first thing, which is very close to my heart, is this forgotten generation. Are we seriously going to allow the next generation to inherit a lower cost of living and pay debts that were accumulated by us? Are we going to? I don't think so. And also the efficiency and waste in government spending. And if you know anyone who works in government, I'm by the way, a strong supporter of the public service. I've been a public servant, as you know. But you can look around your government department or your workplace. You can find areas where there's waste and inefficiency. We all know they're there. So let's address them. Let's do something about it. Let's address, as we have said we will work with the government to address, the runaway $52 billion spending in the NDIS. And the third thing I would say at the campaign of fear and cuts is to come back to our foundational principle that it's your hard work, it's your reward for effort, and you deserve to make the decisions, not government, about how that money is invested.
So you're prepared for a rerun of the scare campaign of spending cuts yesterday? Jim Chalmers warned of savage cuts to Medicare.
I'm prepared for anything because it will give me a chance to talk about personal income taxes and the principles by which we stand firm as Liberals, which is that you are best placed to decide what happens to the money that you have worked incredibly hard to earn, to save, and to build a future with.
Now, on industrial relations and your call for modern, flexible workplaces, it's another area where the culture has become more entrenched since work choices before the 2007 election. It's a long time ago. And now you're talking about getting rid of Labor's multi-enterprise bargaining or the pattern bargaining to encourage more enterprise bargaining, a reward for effort. And given you've portrayed this as starting to chart a new course, do you expect to tackle more of Labor's IR policies, such as the same job, same pay, moves to enforce more conversion of casual workers to permanent work, or the new regulation of the gig economy?
We'll look at it all, and that doesn't mean we want to make changes to it all. But I highlighted the multi-employer bargaining because I see the reality of that and the fact that people are being punished by, it seems, by unions who are able to insert themselves into agreement making at the enterprise level where both the employer and the employee don't want them there, don't need them there, are paying well above the award and have balanced flexibility, choices, and the aims of the business for the future. Now, I also made it clear in my remarks just now that this is not about taking away entitlements from workers. It's always about putting the importance of the flexibility that both employers and employees can work on together front and centre. And no, it's not about taking away resources, entitlements, or anything. It's about something that we see around us now that, quite frankly, when you talk to businesses, makes no sense. I mean, it's preposterous that a small business in a sector, e.g. hardware, has to behave exactly the same as a massive business with premises across every single state and hundreds of employers. What are we doing to our small businesses? I mean, we're punishing them. I just think of the small business owners that I met in the last campaign who would say to me, I just go home every day. I've stood in my business for 17 hours. Hardly anyone's walked through the door. There's no disposable income in people's pockets. I've got the same smile on my face that I had at the beginning of the day because that's what I do. And then I go home and I have to work for the government. And I don't even understand why, because none of it makes any sense. And I feel the government is punishing me. And that is just something that, resonated with me so many on so many different occasions and makes me determined that we address that. And obviously, when you look at a small business and their workers, those workers are their family members in many cases. So yes, protections for workers, but let's approach this with everyone and everyone's welfare in mind.
And do the Liberals really need to completely reframe this debate? You know, it's a very old debate and a very old system. Do you need to have the option for small business to opt out more, or for very well-performing larger companies that have a very good track record just to opt out of all these rules and regulations?
Everything we do will be guided by the principles that I set out, which is flexibility and cooperation and dialogue and working together. I can remember when employee share ownership schemes came into effect. And that was a strong principle at the time. I don't know if I was working in the ATO, but it was about, well, let's have the employee share in the good fortune and success of the business and be invested in that. It seems to me that the principles of that working together the government has really retreated from. And the problem here is that unions are telling everyone else what to do. And that really isn't right.
Now, the coalition got whacked on working from home at the election, and you said you got it wrong. I'm not sure exactly where you did get it wrong on that, but when you say you support working from home, are you saying you will leave it to the common sense of employers and employees to work out? Or would you support or oppose measures like Victoria's proposal to give employees the right to at least 2 days of work from home a week?
Again, that's a Labor Party approach, if it's even constitutional in Victoria. It's about regulation. It's about demands. It's about making people do things. It's just not the approach the Liberal Party would take, which is about flexibility. Now, sometimes it works really well to work from home. Some people, our emergency services, nurses and teachers can't generally work from home. And clearly there are issues where employees and employers need to have the right discussions. But I have confidence in them. I believe they can. And I know that when they do, we have the best possible outcomes. Because if you're a mum and you've got maybe 2, maybe 3 children and I've lived this life, and you're piling everyone in the car and you're rushing to the childcare centre and you're unloading them, and then you're getting to work and you're running in the door and you're starting your job, and then an hour later the childcare centre rings and you've got to pick one of the children up because something's gone wrong. And then you go home and you feel, I'm not doing my job right, I'm not looking after my family right, I'm not very productive either. So that sort of informs my thinking. And when I talk to women, they respond positively to a party that is interested in policies that actually recognise and reflect their real world experiences like that.
So flexibility on both sides, from an employee point of view and an employee, rather than mandating anything, you'll leave it by and large to businesses and their employees.
Well, businesses and their employees should have those conversations.
Clearly net zero is a hot topic, and Barnaby Joyce has announced he will leave the Nationals. Barnaby says that regional Australia wants to get rid of net zero by 2050, and the Nats seem headed that way. You've got a review of the whole policy, and you've said that the Libs support net zero but not at any cost. Can the coalition hold together if the Libs and Nats split on this issue?
Well, that's a prospective question, Michael, and right now we are in coalition, and it's a coalition I support, as does David Littleproud. With respect to our energy policy development, it's a working group. It's led by Dan Tehan. It has 2 fundamental aims and principles in setting the direction and where we need to land for policy. One is that we need to have a stable, reliable grid that delivers affordable energy for households and businesses. That's the first. And the second is that we will play our part internationally, as we should responsibly, in reducing emissions. But the remark that you quoted, net zero at any cost, that's actually what this government appears to be doing, which is why we stood so firmly against the 2035 targets that they articulated recently. And I don't think anyone actually even thinks they can achieve that. They fail miserably both on cost and credibility, and they've been pretty much exposed as that. So we will work positively and constructively, we already are, within that working group and harness the policy ideas of every single person in our party room to get the energy policy that meets those 2 fundamental principles. But right now, the energy policy of this country is being managed by a government that is effectively delivering a train wreck. And you only have to look at the bailout of, I think, up to 5 smelters now. And really, does the Prime Minister, can he honestly say he wants to be a government that makes things in Australia? Because if you have to bail out 5 smelters and you have all these problems with aluminium, with steel, with your international relationship with the US, etc., you're not going to be making very much in Australia. So right now, the team and I are very dedicated to not just developing our policy, but calling out the Labor failures.
The election result tends to suggest that net zero still attracts strong support from a majority of voters. I'm surprised the opposition hasn't landed the point more that Australia, as you were saying then, has lost its cheap energy advantage. And we now have significantly more expensive energy than the OECD average, which, as you say, is why the smelters now have to be propped up with taxpayers' money. So the idea that Australia will become a clean energy superpower doesn't seem likely anytime soon. So if the coalition did come to power, what could you do about higher energy costs, not in 2050, but in the next 5 to 10 years?
The policy that I just mentioned has affordable lit up, and please have that in your mind, because if you can't afford energy as a household, then we're not looking after you in this country the way we should, and your rights as a citizen are not being protected. If you're a business and you see where you are on the cost curve, and you know, as many businesses have pointed out to me, that's where my energy cost is, that's where my profit curve is, that's why I'm going out of business, or that's why I'm going to the US, then it's a simple fact. If you look at other countries which have over-reliance on renewables, you see that the cost of energy in countries seems to go up at about the same rate as the renewables proportion. I'm not anti-renewables, but I'm certainly anti the government's policy, which is renewables at all cost and disregard for baseload power. So we are taking the time to get this right. Meanwhile, we're holding the government to account for their failures.
I see Aidan Morrison nodding his head up there at the back. So we'll go to the floor from here. First off, sir.
I think that there'd be hardly a person in this room who'd disagree with anything you said. And however, I suspect that if you start promoting these things 2 years out from an election, you're just encouraging Mediscare sort of campaigns that the Labor Party's so good at. I would suggest to you that and the sort of things you're talking about, the average punter is really not across the average punter's main concern is that our generation is handing on to the next generation a lifestyle worse than we inherited. Now, that's the first time in the history of this country. And I would suggest to you, stand up in public and say it's the fault of the politicians, and I'm going to fix it. And I would suggest to you that is the light on the hill thing. That's what people. Will
Thank you.
go for.
Thanks for the question.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And pass on to the. Yeah, Susan.
In reflecting the reality of what I mentioned, intergenerational unfairness, I think that is the way we can effectively prosecute the argument with people who, as you say, may not be focused on what the size of the debt is, but actually are 100% focused on, wow, standards of living are the lowest declining faster than anywhere else in the developed world, and we're passing on a lower standard of living to our children, and the unfairness of that.
Thank you, Sussan Ley. You've outlined a lot of policies, and hopefully many of them will work. But one thing you didn't address is the Aboriginal kind of parallel dysfunctional economy. And I wonder whether the coalition has a plan to address the corruption, the waste, the non-distribution of monies that have plagued Aboriginal trusts and councils in this country, and is actually worth, as we know, hundreds of millions of dollars. So I wonder how the coalition plans to address that. Jacinta Price talked about a review that would kind of sweep through all of these councils. What have you in mind for that problem?
Well, I have my outstanding Shadow Minister, Karen Little. Put up your hand, Karen, so everyone knows who you are in the room. And it's something that's very much front and centre of her considerations as we look at all of our policy in Indigenous Australians, including what you have just described. And personally, when you hear the stories, as I have, they are incredibly concerning. What worries me with Indigenous Australians is that in spite of all of the talk from this government, the indicators, the critical indicators, particularly around early childhood, starting school, participation in those critical early years are going backwards. And that really, really worries me. And I want to see policies that address it.
Fine words. I like the words. I like what you and your colleagues are talking about. But in reality, we need to get some policies out here. We need to articulate to the broader public what the Liberal Party stands for, what its values are, and get 3 or 4 policies out. Now, we need these policies done now, urgently, because the debate in the press constantly is about the disunity amongst the party and all this stuff. You won't change the debate to get some policies out. Now, Dick Greiner appointed me chairman of the Banking and Finance Division, and I've been advocating this in my branch over 3 or 4 policies out with some urgency. Just talking all the time is great. It's nice sentiment, but you need to get some hardcore policies out here so that you shift the debate in the media and have a good argument about good policies urgently, not this 12 months out. It's too late.
Well, thank you, Trevor, and your intervention there is not dissimilar from others that I receive. However, I want to make this point. We actually do have many policies, and soon I'm going to actually create a list, one of which is that we will spend 3% as a floor, not a ceiling, on defence. It's 2.5 years till the next election. Some people are saying to me, why are you even talking about this now? You should wait until much closer to the election and then you can say something more in more detail. I believe what I've outlined today is quite a bold approach that is actually saying we will have personal income tax cuts at the next election. It's not an aspiration. It's actually we need to see what the state of the budget is before we actually describe what they look like. And we're not at this point in time aware of what Labor's spending profile is going to be between now and then. But I do believe it gives people clear indicators of where we will go. And I just did talk about energy policy, and obviously you'll see that. But when people talk to me about the values of the Liberal Party, there wouldn't be a stand-up that I do, including here, Michael, where I don't say freedom, choice, aspiration, enterprise, reward for effort. They are the values of the Liberal Party, and they're timeless. And everything that we do is through that prism.
Paul Karp from the Australian Financial Review, thanks very much for your speech. You said what workplace flexibility isn't. It isn't stripping conditions away. But what is it? What are the win-wins for employers and employees you'd like to see more of? You gave the example of a hardware store that shouldn't be expected to act the same as a big national company. But what fixes that? Is it a small business award, for example?
It's not necessarily a particular award. What it is recognition that at every level of business, the primary consideration has to be first that workers continue to become better off over time. I want to see real wages increase. I want to see workers with more to spend, with more in their pocket. But also to recognise that if you have a union that unilaterally inserts itself into a bargaining arrangement, turns up in your workplace, insists that things have to be done a certain way, that there's inflexibility in the hours or the definition of a casual worker, or whether you can, how you might pay somebody in a hospitality business with very variable hours when it might suit the worker to just sign on and sign off depending on what their university shifts are, etc. When you have a union that is effectively calling the shots, that puts that level of inflexibility into the arrangement that should naturally work the best for both the employer and the employee, then something does need to be done.
Hi, Susan. Lockie Leeming from The Australian. Thanks for your speech. You touched on it slightly, but will you outline a pathway to surplus at the next election?
Yes, we will. And it's important that we give Australians the confidence that we are going to tackle intergenerational unfairness, deficits as far as the eye can see, and unrestrained government spending.
Hi, Kayla Alea from the Sydney Morning Herald. Hi, Susan. I'd just like to ask, given Barnaby Joyce's leaving of the coalition, have you spoken to Joyce? And what do you think of his planned departure from the Nats? Is it a betrayal of the party?
Look, I did give Barnaby a call because, we've been colleagues in Parliament for a long time and I just wanted to check in. I'm obviously not going to give you any further details of the discussion other than to say it was just a check-in between two people who've been collegiate over many years. The issues that you have described are matters for the National Party, not the Liberal Party. I'm always very careful when it's a matter between the Nationals and the Liberals to stay carefully in my lane and not give gratuitous advice across the coalition divide.
Andrew Neil, Times Radio and the Daily Mail. You mentioned that the recent study showed that productivity in this country in the past decade was the worst for 60 years, which means the problems didn't start in 2022. So I wonder what work and thoughts you've given as to how much the Liberal Party was complicit in this collapse in productivity, what lessons you've learned from that study and how that will inform your policies going forward. And sticking with productivity, you talked about how you supported working from home. Well, working from home is now prevalent in the British public sector. You can walk down Whitehall of an afternoon and there's more tumbleweed than people these days. Public sector productivity is also 20% below where it was before the pandemic. So how do you reconcile an increase in productivity in the public sector where it's worst with working from home?
Well, you've described the balance in the discussion between how you land on the appropriate working from home model, Andrew. And obviously there are tensions between what you've described as one that is probably not in the interests of the British civil service and the one that I described, which is in the interests and I would argue would make working mums more productive. But that's why regulation and mandates are not the answer and careful discussion and consideration are. With respect to productivity, I think I've been very upfront in saying that as we left COVID, the spending that we put in place then has contributed to the overall level of debt. However, we were exercising fiscal discipline and bringing that down. Obviously, those years were years where we lagged behind. And if you're pointing to 60 years, I'm certainly not going to suggest that everything that the Liberal Party in government did was the right thing at the right time with the benefit of hindsight. But what I do know now is that 0.2% and the forecasts in front of us are the most dire for 60 years, that it is awful when you look forward, and it is an issue that this government is refusing to address. Everyone remember the productivity roundtable. It caused Ted O'Brien to lose his cool, and he's a pretty sensible, moderate kind of guy, because if you imagine 3 days of sitting in a room and not one issue of how to address runaway government spending. So the only response this government has is to tax Australians more, to tax hardworking Australians more. So they're not even talking about productivity in ways that would move the dial even in the slightest bit. Whereas we know that red tape, regulation, it's sort of something that sometimes people's eyes glaze over. Andrew Bragg's the Shadow Minister for Deregulation, and he's always explaining how much deadweight cost this is to the economy, just more and more and more compounding regulation. We have to do something about that. We have to address flexible workplaces. And back to the subject of energy, if you look at multi-factor productivity, energy and technology are absolutely key, and this government is failing on both. So looking forward, I'm concerned.
What are you going to do what are you doing to inoculate yourself and the team against the attack that you know is coming? For example, on Medicare, when you were saying, we're going to do this, we're going to do that, every interview, every speech, let me tell you what we're not going to do. We're not touching Medicare. Or is that not feasible?
Graham, you've pointed to the political challenge, but I refuse to lead a Liberal Party that rolls itself into a small ball because of a fear campaign, which is why I have decided to make this very clear today, because unless you set the goal and you are determined to get there, then it can all fall by the wayside. And unfortunately, that is not going to be in the interest of the Australian people, nor is it going to be able to demonstrate the clear difference between ourselves and the Labor Party. So with the scare campaign that you talk about, I'm going to welcome it and say, well, I do welcome the chance to talk about the importance of personal income tax, because it means you get to keep more of what you earn. You make the decisions about your money. I'm going to talk about intergenerational fairness, because no one wants to see the subsequent generations inherit a lower standard of living. And we are going to talk about government waste, because if you look at the more and more government spending over time, everyone can see that it is inefficient, in many cases ineffective, and in many cases it's downright egregious.
So, because I'm not an Australian, I'm from Japan, may I ask you one question about foreign policy? What will be the biggest difference between the current Labour government and your future government on foreign policy?
It's a timely question with respect to the Prime Minister's visit to Washington, and I've said publicly that when he sits down with the President in the Oval Office, it is a Team Australia moment, and we do genuinely wish him well. We unashamedly back the US alliance and everything that it has brought and will bring to our region for peace and security. And coupled with that is the AUKUS arrangement that I accept that this government says it supports, but we need a demonstrated outcome from the Prime Minister's trip to the US that actually says we're serious about AUKUS Phase 2. There are things that are going to happen, and AUKUS Phase 1 is not caught up in the current arrangements that make it less certain. So we want a big tick for AUKUS. We also want steel and aluminium tariffs, which is something slightly different. I know that you're from Japan, and one of the things that I included in my letter to the Prime Minister was to revitalise the Quad, because it is so important for our ongoing security in the Indo-Pacific region. Thank you.
Opposition Leader Tom Dewswick from The Australian. One of the significant reforms of the last Parliament were the aged care reforms that were driven by Annika Wells and Senator Rustin. A key to that was the expansion of user pays into social services. Is that a principle that will guide your policy development going forward?
Can I just remind everyone of the outstanding job that Anne Ruston did in holding the Labor government to account on aged care home packages a couple of parliamentary sittings ago. This government thought it was okay to say, it's all too hard to get in place, so we just won't put these aged care packages which support older Australians living in their homes for longer. So we were able to shame them into doing what they actually said they would do, keeping their promises. I'm now quite worried that they have taken their eye off the ball again with respect to where the costs land on individuals within those aged care packages. So we accepted in broad support that we needed to change the direction with aged care policy. That didn't mean we gave them a free pass to have arrangements in place where somebody is paying $100 or in one example I heard, for somebody to come and actually just shower them twice a week or once a week. So when you have a government that doesn't have the right levels of accountability at every step in a process, then you know that they've got things wrong. So whether it be that example or the general approach, which is just to add more money, add more programs and add more spending, we have to look at it from the perspective of the user, the consumer, the person that you are there to help. Labor looks at it from the perspective often of the program. We always look at it from the point of view of the consumer. It's the consumer that we should back. It's the consumer that expects us as their government to act in their interests.
Savoslovsky, congratulations, good speech. When you look at productive migration links to it, could you say a few words about how do you see migration under your government, especially the size of migration and type of migration to Australia?
The government's migration policy has run badly off the rails, and I have said that our migration numbers will be lower. The pathway to what the individual components of those numbers look like is being worked on now by my team. Because within the overall migration numbers are several different strands. Skilled migration, very important where I come from in regional Australia where you can't get a workforce. Family reunion, appropriate. Humanitarian and students on international student visas. And there are many other subcomponents with different types of visas for different types of activities. Whenever you listen to the government talk about migration, they get the numbers wrong. They brought 1 million people to Australia in just 2 years, and they certainly never forecast that. So they have no idea what is going on with either their permanent migration numbers, it seems, or more importantly, the NOM. So we need to have a policy that Australians can have confidence in, because right now Australians, including migrant communities, are saying to me that the pressure on infrastructure, particularly in the cities, is such that migration is clearly too high. This is not the fault of any migrant or migrant community. This is a failure of governments to build the infrastructure that our communities deserve, whether it be roads, hospitals, the commute to work, the public transport. All of that is falling badly behind. And having visited our major cities and big regional centres for many years, I can see that. So we have to get this right in the interests of our communities and their fact that they deserve to have the amenities in their cities that they need. And just one more thing, whenever you hear Tony Burke talk about migration, just remember two things. He's refusing to give us a 4-year plan. What does that tell you? He's got no idea. He's still got no idea what the 4-year plan is or what the number will be. And the other thing he's refusing to acknowledge is that the government actually knew that ISIS brides were coming to this country. This is people who, as I've said, the word brides might make some people think it's some sort of romance gone wrong. These are not. These are members of a death cult that has at its heart the destruction of our way of life. This is a government and an immigration minister that told untruths in the parliament, downright lied about providing assistance, when clearly the AFP and all of our security agencies were well aware that these individuals are on their way, if not here already, and could not answer basic questions. And just came back from Victoria where the community is up in arms about crime on the streets. And they said, well, now we have to worry about this. What more people are going to be released onto our streets? So I hope I give you some sense of the complete failures of this government when it comes to migration policy.
Okay, well, I have one or two quickly short ones because we're getting to the end of our time.
Sandy Dawson. One of the strongest opposition performances prior to the election was Ted O'Brien's debate with Chris Bowen on nuclear power. And given that there are something like 470 nuclear reactors in the world, there are another 130 being built, will you adopt nuclear and argue about it strongly? Because that's, after all, what happened at the last COP, whatever number it was in Baku. It seems to be that it's a very strong point of difference and something that you can probably win the population over with, because it makes so much sense and you've got so many good examples of other countries getting right into it, like Germany, for example.
Thanks, Andy, and you're absolutely right. That was an outstanding performance by Ted, who's now doing incredible work as the Shadow Treasurer as well. Stutch is giving me the glare because I'm taking too long with my answers, but I just want to say Dan Tehan, who leads the working group that I spoke of just now, has just come back from the US where he's studying the latest developments in micronuclear reactors. We've already agreed that we will, as Liberals and Nationals, remove the moratorium on nuclear power. And broadly, a technology agnostic approach should allow the types of industries that make sense for the affordable, reliable baseload power that I talked about to take their place in our energy mix.
Yes, sir, quickly, if we could. Thank you.
Yes. I noticed in this morning's Australian, they've updated the money wasted on fixing up, making changes to our electricity network. And the latest figure, which starting from now up till 2050, is now $10 trillion. Now, if the net zero, if Australia withdrew from net zero, we would save $10 trillion over the next 25 years. Just have your thoughts on that.
There's some eye-watering numbers, that's for sure. And the Business Council of Australia came up, I think, with $540 billion as one of the cost components when Labor came out with its 2035 targets. I think that you raise a really important point, because all of this is subsidised by government and hidden. So the capacity investment scheme, which underwrites a lot of these renewables projects, if you look at it in the budget papers, it's got, commercial in confidence, not for publication. So we don't even know how much it is costing. And it's a cynical exercise by Chris Bowen and the rest of them to pretend that there's some massive advantage and that this is going to bring down power prices in Australia, when clearly the $275 promise, remember Anthony Albanese saying, it will happen, I've seen it, I've seen the modelling, and look what the result is. So this will clearly be a major consideration as we work on the energy policy I described.
Thank you. One last one. One last one. Then.
Sorry, Michael Yanda from ABC News. The Coalition initially opposed a critical minerals reserve. Given recent moves by China to increase export controls, what's your position now?
It's a very important area of policy with respect to the minerals that we have and the processing that needs to happen to bring them to a state where they can be part of a future supply chain for computers, for automobiles and defence. And it's not so much the rare earths themselves, it's actually the processing that is really where the IP, the science and the technology is. And the Morrison government certainly invested in doing some more of that in Western Australia, which I was part of the decision at the time. We're watching current developments with interest.
Well, Sussan, we've really put you through your paces. We've reached the end of our allotted time. It's been an absolute pleasure to welcome you and your colleagues to the Centre for Independent Studies. At CIS, our work has always been about ideas that make Australia stronger. We don't take government funding. That's why our members and donors are so important. And your support in this, people in this room, makes it possible for us to ask the tough questions, challenge the assumptions, and present ideas that lead to better decisions. We plan to do more of this, including hosting Senator Bragg on housing by the end of the year. Peter Tulip, our researcher, continues to shape the housing crisis solutions towards more supply by winding back planning restrictions. Our fiscal scholar, Robert Carling, is working on how to restore fiscal rules to get the budget under control. Aidan Morrison and his team are leading the energy debate on Australia's high-cost transition. Now led by Glenn Fahey, our education team has reshaped the schooling debate over the past 2 decades. Peter Curti is leading an important multi-year project into combating the disturbing rise of anti-Semitism in Australia. And Parnell McGuinness is heading a new project into divining what do modern Australians want and how can classical liberalism help them get it. So thank you, Sussan, and to everyone for being here and for supporting the CIS as we continue our work for a better Australia. Can you please join me in thanking the Leader of the Opposition? For decades, CIS has been a fiercely independent voice, working hard to promote sound liberal principles. To be notified of our future videos, make sure you subscribe to our channel, then click the notification bell. We rely on the generosity of people like you for donations to advance our classical liberal cause. Check out the links on screen now to see how you can get involved.